Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
Good Monday morning. It is 7:06 on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for letting us be a part of your morning. Coming up at 7:35, we'll talk to Trevor Matich on the Commander's latest win. 8:05, Dr. Betsy Congdon. She's with NASA, and she'll talk about a spacecraft that's making a close approach to the sun. Very cool story. And at 8:35, Julie Kelly. She'll give us an update on the January 6 cases. I'm Julie Gunlock, alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Good morning, Hans.
Good morning, Julie. And is it too early to wish you a Merry Christmas?
It is not too early. Merry Christmas to you, too. And joining us now, Joe diGenova. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. It's great to talk to you. We are going to start off talking with the good news story of the, decade. ABC News must pay President Trump $15 million. I love that it has to go directly, payable to the future Trump library following this defamation settlement. And even better, George Stephanopoulos, who built his career covering up for his boss's sexual abuses, has to issue a public apology. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Well, it couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of people. I mean, ABC News, CBS, and NBC have become just albatrosses around what used to be called journalism. It's an embarrassment. And Stephanopoulos has never been a journalist. And let's just be very clear. George Stephanopoulos is not a journalist. He's an arm of the Democratic Party who's been sitting there since the Clinton administration at ABC News, pretending to be a journalist and doing damage to journalism the entire time. But apparently all the suits and skirts at ABC thought it was just fine, and they loved it, and they thought they were making money off of them, and they could have cared less about journalism. So a pox on all their houses. Again, couldn't happen to a nicer bunch, and I hope they keep libeling more people and have to pay more money.
Joe, it was so interesting. Earlier this week, Leslie Stahl and Peggy Noonan were on stage at some event. I could tell from the laughter. You saw this clip, and they're just hard to miss. So confused about the death of journalism. Well, when you have George Stephanopoulos, who's never exited campaign mode, presented as an anchor, as a journalist, maybe that's why.
Well, Leslie Stahl, first of all, I've been interviewed by 60 Minutes, I think about maybe 6-7 times when I was U.S. attorney and independent counsel. And since then, I've been interviewed by Leslie Stahl twice, Mike Wallace and a couple of other people. Wow. I can't remember them all. Leslie Stahl lost her way over Donald Trump. They've always been lefty nutso at 60 Minutes, but they were never what they are now, which is an embarrassment to journalism. First of all, every time I hear Scott Pelley, I think of Anchorman. I can't believe that phony Centaurian voice sitting there trying to look serious. Well, were you actually in the room when the murder occurred? I mean, the guy is an embarrassment. But poor Leslie. Leslie actually thinks she's right now. Yeah. She has drunk so much Kool-Aid that when she corrected Donald Trump during that 60 Minutes interview, Mr. President, we can't report false news about the laptop this is 60 Minutes. And the answer should have been, well, that's why you report false stuff all the time, because you are 60 Minutes. But she's an embarrassment. And it's sort of sad, because I always think of Mike Wallace, who I knew and I liked. Chris Wallace, of course, is an idiot, but it's just an embarrassment. And so they're a joke. They're sort of a dinosaur. It's just they are a dinosaur.
I have one super quick question. Do you think there'll be additional sort of defamation suits? Because we hear this kind of language from The View, what George Stephanopoulos said about Trump being guilty of rape. We hear this from The View. We hear it from Joy Reid. We hear it from everybody at MSNBC. Do you think there'll be additional lawsuits?
Isn't it interesting that ABC produces things like George and The View? They're having to issue what they call these legal explanations all the time because they're ordered to do so by their legal department. They are regularly libeling and slandering people, and they think that by issuing an explanation, that gets them off the hook. Well, it really doesn't get them off the hook. It may affect the amount of damages, but it doesn't affect liability. And I would, as I said, I would love to see ABC News sued repeatedly over the stuff that goes on The View and other places on the network. It's pretty disgusting stuff.
Yeah, although people should remember, Joe, that public figures these days have a very tough time winning defamation lawsuits because of this, I think, actually kind of bizarre double standard that the Supreme Court set up many years ago. As you know, Clarence Thomas in some recent decisions has actually questioned that and said that there really shouldn't be this double standard that makes it much tougher for folks who are public figures to sue when somebody spouts lies about them.
Well, I think Clarence Thomas, as usual, has it absolutely right. The invitation that he has issued to revisit New York Times versus Sullivan, which is the case that set up the actual malice standard in libel for public figures, needs to be revisited. This is not your mother's journalism. New York Times versus Sullivan was written at a time when, at a minimum, we thought we had some standards in journalism. That doesn't exist anymore. There are no standards. We've heard basically declarations of independence by journalists at major news organizations saying they don't believe in objectivity. They don't believe in fact-finding. Their job is to take down somebody like Donald Trump. And if that's your position, you're not entitled to that type of immunity under the First Amendment. So I agree wholeheartedly with Clarence Thomas. It's time to revisit New York Times versus Sullivan. It's time to get rid of this actual malice requirement for public figures. We need to restore public figures. If you want people to serve in public office, one of the things you have to do is allow them to protect their reputations. It's not good enough to say, well, they have the public, they have the bully pulpit, they can defend themselves. No, that doesn't work. The lie goes around the world 5 times before the truth ever catches up with it.
Yeah, no, that's really true. So have we got time to get into the whole pardons thing?
Let's start it.
Let's start it. Joe, I was just astonished at the number of pardons and clemencies, 1,500 that the president issued. Yeah. And for folks who don't know, there's an office at the Justice Department, it's the Office of Pardons, that is supposed to investigate and review every application for pardon and clemency to ensure that only people deserving of it. There's no way, right? That office could have reviewed that many applications.
It's highly unlikely. We didn't hear anything from the White House like saying this has been reviewed by the Pardon Office. These were probably done out of the White House counsel's office, where they get all the political importunings and the mail comes in from their friends. The one that offends me the most, other than Hunter Biden, and the ones that are coming for James Biden and the rest of the Biden family, the one that offends me the most is the Pennsylvania judge who sent young boys to privately funded prisons for millions of dollars in kickbacks. Joe Biden will live in infamy for the shameful pardon. Even the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who can't figure out a way to not to say nice things about Democrats, said that he felt that the president was all wrong on this one. Well, gosh, Josh, thank you so much. It was worse than wrong. This was a moral abomination, pardoning that judge who sent all these boys to these institutions for no reason whatsoever other than kickbacks. That guy should not be allowed to walk in public. If by the way, if Maxine Waters wants to have people get in somebody's face, get in his face.
Joe, can you stick around for another segment? We've got more to get to.
Yes, I can.
Well, we will continue with Joe in just a moment, but first, it is 7.
WMAL.
Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
News and weather are brought to you by WAPA.
So, Joe, we were just talking about that outrageous clemency for the judge in Pennsylvania. By the way, that led to the overturning of 4.
And by the way, is his name. People need to know it's former Judge Michael Conahan.
Right. But that wasn't the only outrageous one. And Josh Shapiro wasn't the only Democrat upset. He did the same thing Joe Biden did for a guy who ran a synthetic drug ring in Minnesota, and even Amy Klobuchar came out criticizing him for providing clemency to a drug dealer. In fact, there were a lot of drug dealers.
Yeah, maybe friends of Hunter. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, right?
Well, you know what's interesting about this? I looked at this whole list, and you go through it. It's pretty disgusting. It's pretty obvious that Joe Biden has checked out. But I'm wondering, I look at this, and it smells bribe to me. As an old prosecutor, you look at things, and I'm just saying to myself, how did this happen? How did some of these people, remember, the Biden family is about grift. It's about using government to make money. Was there a scheme to grant pardons for cash? I don't know. I'm just asking the question. Given the history of the Biden family and this president, this clown leaving office, I just wouldn't put it past him to have decided that on his way out, let's just make a few bucks. I'm just asking the question, did that happen? And maybe the incoming Republican House of Representatives might want to subpoena all the records related to all these pardons and bring some people in for depositions and see if they can find out whether any money exchanged hands. I don't know if it did. I don't know if it didn't. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. But given the history of the Biden family, looks pretty ugly.
Well, it might be worth looking into, especially if there is a Biden Foundation form to see who in the future gives to it. I mean, another person who received clemency was a lawyer, I think out of Chicago or Illinois, who the judge said was the subject of the biggest tax fraud prosecution ever by the Justice Department. Again, as you said, not only I think was Joe Biden sympathetic to drug dealers, but apparently to tax cheats too.
Oh, this is an amazing list of people unworthy of clemency. And we must remember, not all of these were pardons. Most of them were commutations of sentences.
Right.
Time served, or people who were in prison, like this Judge Conahan, he got out early. The bottom line is that the pardon power is there to be used, and it's also there to be abused. We tolerate that. We have historically tolerated abuse of the pardon process by Clinton and others and Biden because we believe that in the end, the Constitution, the founders realized this might happen, but they thought it was more important to have clemency. And all of us understand that. But it still doesn't take away the sting when you get somebody like this Judge Conahan who caused suicides, who harmed these young men by sending them to these facilities. And it's evil when a president uses the power this way. And what's important, and I'm surprised by how much the media is covering this, and they probably wouldn't have had he not pardoned Hunter. The truth is, this is evil, and Biden deserves denunciation in the worst possible way, starting with Hunter and going through Judge Conahan and others.
I want to switch over. We have a few minutes left, but I want to switch over to Georgia. Nathan Wade basically admitted to colluding with the White House. Can we play cut 17, Michael? 1 second.
Georgia prosecutor in the Trump election meddling case testifies before the House Judiciary Committee. That's Nathan Wade. And he admitted he met with White House staff on several occasions while working on the investigation that was led by Fulton County DA Fonnie Willis. He also says he had to brush up on his knowledge of racketeering law. So that continued.
So, Joe, I mean, what will happen with this sort of latest revelation coming out of Georgia?
Well, remember, what the mainstream media always wants you to do when it involves a Democrat is suspend intelligence. They want you to stop thinking. They want you not to use rational thoughts to get to a conclusion. They don't want you to draw inferences from the obvious facts. What was the reason that Nathan Wade had to meet with people at the White House? He couldn't remember. That was also part of his testimony. He admitted going there because he couldn't cover that up because there were logs showing that he had visited multiple times as had Fannie Willis. Why was he there? He couldn't remember. That's not true. He knows exactly why he was there. So, number one, he's probably not going to get a pardon from Biden, although Biden might slip it in. You never know.
Right.
Nathan Wade should get a grand jury subpoena from the new U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, who I hope is Cully Stimson, by the way, a great lawyer and somebody that would succeed this slug, Matthew Graves, that's a U.S. attorney now, should issue a subpoena for Nathan Wade and get him up here in a federal grand jury, or one in Georgia. Any federal grand jury will do. But he needs to be put in front of a grand jury so that if he says he can't remember, people can be prosecuted for lying when they say, I can't remember.
Yeah. Joe, thank you so much. We have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Joe. It's 7:23.
Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
So cheerful. Good Monday morning. It is 7:36 on O'Connor and Company. Thanks for letting us be a part of your morning. Coming up at 8:05, Dr. Betsy Congdon. She's with NASA, and she'll talk about a spacecraft that's just days away from a historically close approach to the sun. And at 8:35, Julie Kelly, she'll give us an update on the January 6th cases. I'm Julie Gunlock, sitting in for Larry O'Connor alongside Hans von Spakovsky. Good morning, Hans.
Good morning, Julie.
And joining us now is, there we go, Trevor Matich. Good morning, Trevor.
Good morning, Julie. Hello, Hans.
Morning, Trevor.
So the Commanders nearly blew a 17-point lead in the second half of the game against the Saints yesterday, but they held on to win 20-19. But boy, this came with a lot of injuries. What are your thoughts on the game and some of those injuries that we saw prior to? There were some injured players already on the list, but we had some injuries during the game as well.
Yeah, there were. And I'll tell you what, you talked about injuries prior to. You look at Tyler Biadasz at center. I think he was a late scratch because of injuries. Because of an illness. And I think a lot of people didn't really realize how important that would be, but it was very difficult for them to run because Biadasz, the center, was out. The communication and pass protection was a real problem, and there were 7 or 8 sacks of Jaden Daniels, in part because of that. I mean, some of those were on him, but at the same time, there was an issue. But tight end Zach Ertz, who's one of the most important people on this team, he was out with a concussion. And then you've got Jeremy Chin, safety. I mean, he's one of the leading tacklers on this team. He got hurt. And so there were a bunch of guys that got banged up and out, and that's part of the reason they struggled so much.
Yeah, I mean, is that the reason? It's like they started off strong.
Yeah.
And it went like downhill throughout the whole game. I mean, is that because of the injuries, you think?
That's part of it. But also remember this about the Saints. The Saints fired their head coach, and we're working on an interim head coach here in this game. Their starting quarterback, their top 2 receivers were out. Their backup quarterback played so poorly they put in their third-string quarterback, Spencer Rattler, who was a rookie drafted in the 5th round, and still almost erased a 17-point deficit in the mid-third quarter and came back and were throwing for the win on a 2-point conversion as time expired. So it wasn't just the injuries for the Commanders. I mean, part of it is penalties. They had 9 penalties in this game. They've had 28 in the last 3 weeks, which is an enormous number of penalties. And the defense seems to be falling apart in the second half too often. I mean, the comeback by the Saints featured big runs, big passes, a lot of big plays. And so these are things that they've got to work out because right now the Commanders are in the last playoff spot. They're competing with several teams to keep that last playoff spot. And they got the win against the Saints, and the only thing that counts is wins, and they got the win. But at the same time, they've got 3 games to go, and they're making a lot of mistakes, and they could bounce themselves right out of the playoffs if they don't clean it up.
And that included missing a field goal that could have made that 2-point conversion not so important at the end, right?
Yeah, no, that's right. And on their last drive, Washington was up 20-13, and they got a 4th down, long field goal, 54-yard attempt. And remember, they had a new kicker. They've had like 4 kickers this year. You keep getting hurt, and they have to re-sign guys, for goodness sake, or sign new guys. And so now they're in like their fourth kicker or so. And the coach Dan Quinn decides that he wants to kick a 54-yard field goal to put it out of reach instead of punting and giving the Saints rookie quarterback a long field to have to drive to potentially tie or win the game. Well, the snap was on the ground. It was a bad snap. The kicker missed the field goal. And so the Saints got the ball about midfield, and then they drove it down and scored the touchdown that could have tied it and might have won it had they gotten the two-point conversion, but they got some help from the officials. The officials had an abysmal mistake, a clear mistake.
Was this Was this the clock stopping at 9 seconds?
That's exactly what it was, Julie, and that's a great point, because what happened was 17 seconds to go. The Saints throw the ball to get a first down at the 1 yard line. The official runs in from the side, waving his hands in the air to stop the clock. Well, in college, you stop the clock on a first down until you spot the ball and get ready to go. In the NFL, you don't do that. He might have thought he was in a college game, but he stopped the clock. Now, here's the thing. He stopped the clock at 9 seconds. The Saints finally spiked the ball with 3 seconds to go. And then on the next play with 3 seconds to go, they scored a touchdown, and that's when they were going for the point after, the 2-point conversion after that with no time on the clock. But had that official not stopped the clock, they would not have had time, the Saints, to run up, get set, and spike it, because 4 to 5 seconds it took between the time that the clock was stopped by the official incorrectly. It was just a flat-out mistake. It wasn't a judgment call. It was a flat-out mistake. And and they wouldn't have had time to spike the ball. So it didn't cost the Commanders in this case, but if it had, then they might have lost the game, and they might have missed the playoffs because an official didn't know when he was and was not supposed to stop the clock. That's inexcusable.
So, Trevor, it is we're a Monday morning quarterbacking here, but it is Monday morning. But interesting, wasn't it, that they went for the 2-point conversion instead of tying the game? At which point they would have had overtime to try to beat Washington. That was quite a risky decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was risky, but I think it was the right decision, because the Saints, even though their offense got hot late in the second half, still were working with a rookie quarterback without their top 2 receivers against a Washington team that had a high first-round draft rookie at quarterback who is a strong candidate to be NFC Offensive Rookie of the Year. And I think from an overtime perspective, he thought he had a better chance at one play while they were hot, while they had the defense on their heels, the Washington defense on their heels, than to try to get into an extra quarter scenario in overtime and have his rookie stay hot. So I thought that was the right call, but it wasn't a good play call, because they scored a touchdown on a short out to the right, a short pass pattern to the right that was just inside the goal line. Well, the 2-point conversion was the exact same route. It was a different receiver and it was a different formation, but the exact same route. And so the defense saw it coming and they jumped on it for the 2-point conversion, whereas the play before, they gave up a touchdown on the same route. So I thought that was a bad play call, but it was a good decision by the Saints coach.
Well, Trevor, we got to leave it there. Thanks so much for coming on.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys. They're hanging on to that last playoff spot.
Hey, and happy holidays, too. We'll talk to you next week, though.
Thanks, Julie. I appreciate it. Happy holidays to you guys.
Yeah. We've got more coming up at 7:44. A lot of the dogs and cats and other animals they get are from the breeding industry. So New York wants to end that. Fair enough. They will be allowed to rent their spaces to sort of, rescue organizations that have adoption fairs. What are your thoughts on this, Hans? Important issue.
Well, I'm not quite sure. So people have been in the business of breeding animals, dogs, and for hundreds, thousands of years.
Yes.
Why is it all of a sudden? Why all of a sudden is that somehow evil or a problem?
Well, they claim that it's inhumane. This is the interesting thing. My colleague over at IWF, she lives in New York City, Inez Stetman. You might know Inez. And she does policy on education, higher ed, and she has a great podcast. But she once tried to adopt a cat in New York City, and the process was astonishing. I think she wrote about it, about how these people had to come over and interview them, and they had to have references. The adoption people had to come and inspect their home. It was this grueling process. I think she now has a cat. She probably plucked it out of some alley because that was easier to do. But, I just think there's going to be a lot of animals that are if we're just going to rely on. Some people buy an animal, go to a breeder, because the adoption process it's harder. Some people would say it's harder to adopt a cat than it is a child. So I don't know who's going to win here.
Well, does that mean they're going to have to? What is that famous dog show? My wife and daughters always was it the Westminster?
Oh yes, of course.
The dog show.
Yes.
They're going to have to move it out of New York City.
I guess so. Well, I don't know. We'll watch this. I don't know that this is good news for any of these people looking for an animal. Again, the adoption process in New York City to adopt an animal is just grueling. So I think people are probably just going to have to get used to not having pets in New York City. We've got more at 7.